Good afternoon this time, and welcome to another episode of A Cup of Coffee with Bill. I'm excited for today's episode with AJ Maestas, founder and CEO of Navigate, and we're here to talk about a big discussion piece in the sports industry, one that I've been interested in, one that Jim Kaler and I discussed briefly on his episode that we've described as the Wild West of college athletics and sales coming up next year. And that is the name, image, and likeness NIL regulations in college athletics. AJ, I've seen your name pop up in the news about research and discussion around this topic. So thank you for joining me. I think this is really the next frontier in sponsorship sales, licensing, anything to do around college athletics. This is really going to make waves. So thank you for coming on and joining me today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and I'm flattered to follow Jim Kaler. I consider him one of my absolute great mentors and, shaman in this industry. So very cool.
To many of us indeed. So for my audience that hasn't had the great pleasure of meeting you and having conversations or learn from you as I did at Ohio University in some classes, can you give us a brief overview of Navigate and what you do with the company?
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very flattering. So Navigate's my business. At this point, what I do with it is act as an evangelist, essentially, right? And beyond that, I guess my job is to attract and retain talent, which I'm very proud of how we treat people. We do a pretty darn good job of getting amazing people to work with us and stay with us for a long time. Navigate 15 years ago when we were founded was essentially research, measurement, analytics around sponsorship, the efficacy and efficiency of sponsorship investments. About 5 years ago, we were so far pulled into a further relationship with clients, almost being a strategic consultant. So you can laugh at this, but we tell people we're the McKinsey of sports. And that work has branched out into stuff like team relocations, like the NFL teams or the NHL expansion to Vegas and Seattle, or television deals and media and multimedia rights deals, which we've worked on numerous. Just fun stuff, getting into strategic assignments and really interesting things. The launch of the XFL, even though it's defunct now, real transformative assignments when something major is happening with an organization. And we've been unbelievably lucky in who we work with. All the league offices have been a client, all the major networks and broadcasters, 13 of the top 15 agencies, and then this killer roster of blue chip brands, Anheuser-Busch, Pepsi, Visa, Oracle, T-Mobile, Toyota. We probably don't even deserve the company that we keep, but yeah, that's the gist. And by the way, I'm following in your footsteps, and we're starting a podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, I noticed nice opening guest in Oliver Luck, I believe, correct?
Yeah, we have some really fun opening ones. We'll have the SEC commissioner come up here shortly, and Roger Baldessari is absolutely a legend if you're not familiar with him. And so I'm excited about it because we get to rub elbows with unbelievable people. When you hear Navigate and you think of consulting and research and analytics in sports, that doesn't sound very sexy, right? So. But the people we get to work with are incredible. So our hope is to share those people, with our friends.
Excellent. No, congrats for you. That's a fantastic start. So to get on to the NIL discussion, how big of a piece of the work your team is doing right now does that consume as the NCAA is inching closer to implementing these changes that will allow college athletes to monetize their brand, their personal brand?
Very little right now. Unfortunately, there's been an RFP in some things where the NCAA is going to spend money to get in front of it, but it didn't look like a fit for us, so we didn't participate. And a lot of the schools that we really love that are progressive and proactive and people we want to work with are just dipping their toe in the water right now. We don't really know what rules we're going to operate under yet. So very little right now, but that will obviously change. We're working on a couple of multimedia rights deals As you can imagine, this could be complementary and also a threat to sponsorships on campus. So that was certainly a consideration and continues to be in that work, but not as much as you'd think, not as much as you'd think, but that's about to change.
Yeah, and that seems to be the general consensus, whether a anybody wants to say it or not, is the you look at what's in the news and what the NCAA has stated, and yes, they say that an athlete will be able to monetize their name, their likeness, um, but we don't know to what extent a school will be able to police those deals if it conflicts with a sponsorship that the school has. They might say that's fine, or they might tell them they have to kick that one to the side and go find something new. It very much seems like it's still up in the air, and I think the NCAA, and correct me if I'm wrong, just uh, moved the review period for the RFP for the third party administrators of these deals to late January.
I wouldn't know. We didn't even honestly read through it, but
Okay.
but everything else, yeah, no question. I mean, we don't really know. Uh, I love the NCAA and I love collegiate athletics. For the record, with that said, the NCAA is reactionary, right? It's
Mhm.
this organizing body, and it's a large and diverse group of members, and it's maybe that's just the way it has to be, but I don't know if you saw, but New Jersey and Connecticut came out with, proposed and, legislation they're trying to move through that moved through at least part of the way quickly and easily, which went much further than the proposed legislation that got us to this point. There's some hints of collective bargaining and representation in there and things like that. So I don't think we're anywhere near having it figured out what it's going to even actually be, right?
Right.
I have a prediction and a feeling of where it'll ultimately go, but as far as summer 2021, that's a moving target right now.
Right. So let's jump to, and we mentioned before we started recording, we know that football players and basketball players at uh, the top tier institutions, and the guys and the women that have large profiles at those schools, they're going to do well for themselves once the template has been put in place, whether it's with national brands or at their school's local level. That doesn't really need to be said. We know that's going to happen. It's just a matter of what the framework looks like. What I'm interested in around this from a sponsorship standpoint, but also from the brand side, is that you have a lot of sports that might not necessarily generate any or very little revenue for a school, but you've got a lot of big personalities on that team that might be attractive to a brand. Now, all of a sudden, you're telling me if I own a car dealership or a nutrition brand that falls within the NCAA guidelines, that I can access that athlete to use in marketing. Again, with certain restrictions, no school marks, but that's where I find it most interesting, is that smaller school athletes, niche sports, track and field, baseball, lacrosse, some of those sports that have a profile, but they aren't in the conversation like college football or college basketball, they're going to be the ones that I think are going to be able to capitalize a great deal off of this. Just curious what your thoughts are on that, and how an athlete, again, I'll lean back on lacrosse because that's my background professionally and in college athletics. But what's your take on that, about an athlete with a great social profile and they're able to create content? How are they going to benefit from this once, assuming the framework is as it's been laid out by the NCAA?
Uh, they certainly will benefit. There's no question. There's a robust and open marketplace for this if you're not a collegiate athlete, right? There are large companies, right? The full screens and maker studios of the world, which is now Disney Digital, that their sole purpose is bringing deals to influencers, right? Or influential people. So influencer marketing is here. It's around, no question. If you have a strong social media following, you'll have value. One of the things that I would caution anyone listening to this on would be how much money, I think there's an overstatement for how much money is going to flow to these athletes. Um, if you look at pro sports, I mean, the big five sports leagues, let's say the NFL, how many guys on an NFL roster are getting meaningful cash sponsorships and endorsements? Not very many, just a handful, honestly. So realistically speaking, we're not talking about a lot of money here, and we're not talking about a lot of deals, but as a former collegiate athlete, take yourself back there. I remember really feeling out of money on a number of occasions and doing some pretty stupid things for extra money. So even if we're just talking about a couple thousand a year, that can be meaningful, student athlete. But just to put it in perspective, when these things are explored with student athletes and you look at their schedule and the demands of their sport and where their priorities are, there's no doubt some show up right from high school as a superstar, whatever, even though it may be a little sport. The vast majority of athletes are too pressed for time as it is. School's a challenge, practice is a challenge. There isn't a bunch of extra time to have the full experience of a university. So I don't think we're going to see a bunch of large deals flowing to the athletes you're talking about. And although some will take advantage and be just naturals at it, right? And they were kind of going that way with their life anyway, because there are some interesting and exceptional people with talents beyond their sport skill. I just don't see this as some giant, solution. If I could make one more comment, I'm going beyond your question with this one, but I think it's important. I see more value in recruiting, which obviously is not included and contemplated with the NCAA at this time, than I do in their value as endorsers. How many dealerships or nutrition bars do you see endorsing more than 1, 2, or 3 athletes anyway, as it is, right? I don't think they'll suddenly create budget to endorse dozens of more athletes because amateur athletes are available. There's hundreds of professional athletes that would do reasonably priced deals, right? There's only so much they can handle with their marketing communications and, with whatever reach that person has. So the part that's out of scope is that it's difficult. You mentioned, management and oversight of it. It's difficult to see the NCAA being able to actively manage this in a reasonable way. And it's pretty difficult to identify what is fair market for something that might be associated with motivation around recruiting, as opposed to actual endorsement, like likeness or image or appearances or whatever it might be. That is where I imagine there being a lot more money, and I find it very difficult to envision how the NCAA would hold that back and regulate it, or who the victim is. Who is the victim of that crime?
That's what is interesting to me. I haven't gotten a hold of the RFP that the NCAA put out for the third-party administrator for these deals, and just for those listening at home, the RFP was essentially calling for a company to monitor, record, and track and publicize any deals that were done with athletes, who they were done with, what the value was, and what the company was getting out of it, in addition to the money or the other exchanges that were going on between the company and the athlete. That it still seems like it's very much in question. I know there was still some debate about how much of that conversation can be used for, hey, we just got Chevy as a, one of our guys has a deal with Chevy. How much of that conversation can be used when a coach goes out for recruiting trips? We don't know. I think they're going to try to shy away from that as much as possible, but it's still such a fluid situation. It does seem like it's going to take 4 or 5 years for them to really iron this out to determine the fair market value of it before we really get a sense of how much high caliber player's tweet is compared to somebody else's tweet or Instagram post.
Sure. And I mean, that's one of the things we do at Navigate, right? I mean, we monitor fair market value and we can identify outliers. And you're right, as I understand it, I didn't read that RFP, but I have coworkers who did. And I think your description's on point from what I understand. Problem is, who are you to say what the marketplace is for those endorsements? Using your auto dealership example, even though they may endorse 0 or 1 professional athlete to be a spokesperson, they're suddenly endorsing a dozen collegiate athletes, on just one university team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who's to say that isn't the market today? They want to do it. Who's to keep them from, spending their money as they wish? How does the NCAA step in to say that's unethical? What subpoena power do they have? None, at least as of right now. Who's to say an athlete reports those deals? I think we all understand deals like this take place right now that are
Right.
motivated court recruiting. And there's technically nothing illegal about it. Well, there's some ways it can become a problem and corrupt, but that was what concerns me. Garbage in, garbage out on a database. So, if the database is sensitive to it and leads to problems, then maybe it won't be put into the database in the first place, right? And
Right.
but I get the intent. The intent is excellent, right? It's to observe this marketplace and identify outliers and what have you. It's pretty tough. My prediction, just to have fun, because this is what I'd want to hear if I was listening, right, is where do I think it's really going to go? It sucks to say, the toothpaste is out of the tube, but I just don't see when a state legislator or a politician of any kind, pushes through a law, what the NCAA can do to stop that, right? And if it serves their constituents, if it gets them votes, if they look good doing it, then they're going to do it. That's what politicians do. So if they just say, hey, they have the right to take deals, even if it is related to recruiting, what are you going to do about NCAA? They're just left to react to that, right? And so this little gray area in a free market economy like we live in a world where every athlete in the world can do this, including amateur athletes associated with the Olympics, with the exception of collegiate athletics in this one country here in the United States, then how in the world are we going to stop that? And how would it actually realistically be regulated? So I hate to be negative. I hope this isn't going too far or harming anybody's feelings, but it's just hard not to see something that is near term, is 2 or 3 years from now, where it's just sort of, it is what it is. There's an open marketplace for there. And going back to my, victimless crime comment, the pain might be an unlevel playing field. Well, that's true right now today in collegiate athletics. There are universities with 1/10 the budget of teams they play, on a semi-regular basis. Who's being harmed? These, young people with great talent that people want to pay for and see are receiving compensation for it. It's hard to see that not happening. But yeah, I realize this is all not yet fully contemplated here in step one, but yeah, that's my opinion. We're talking small money for those Olympic sports and non-mainstream athletes. That is legitimate name, image, and likeness partnerships. But there's pretty significant money out there for other reasons, and I just can't picture you holding the dam back,
Right. And that's part of what I've been trying to settle my mind on, is how much of this is actually the NCAA, not to sound anti-NCAA, but how much of this is them settling on an appearance that we're trying to set up a framework, when in reality, I think they're on the losing end of a battle that was started in California and Florida with their legislation that was passed. It just, going back to what you said, and I agree, it just seems like it's here in everything but name. It's just waiting to come to light and be accepted by the legislative body. So it will be fascinating once it is legitimized, so to speak, in college athletics, what actually happens. And you just gave me a thought that how does that then, not to go too far into hypotheticals, but how does that turn into a recruiting inducement, that if you're recruiting a power forward, and it's like, hey, look, we know you're big on social media and you've got a couple of companies in your town that are interested in supporting you. Have we shown you our podcast studio or our video recording studio? That's another thing that is a fascinating evolution that I don't know if we're terribly far off from once this is acceptable on college campuses. What are your thoughts? I know we're starting to stray from that, but I mean, do you see something like that happening?
It's already happening. I don't know if you've had a chance to check out the studio concept that USC has created. But you think of the power of Los Angeles and the entertainment industry and the sex appeal of LA and the beach and all those things that are subtly, sold in recruiting. But now there's the chance to blatantly, openly, make that a benefit of making Los Angeles your headquarters, right, for your 4 years or however many for your collegiate experience. Going back to your point earlier, by the way, I'm confident the overwhelming majority of people who work at the NCAA, it's not just about optics. They're trying to do the right thing. They believe in sound mind and body and the full collegiate experience, and they want to protect amateurism, and they believe that in the virtues of the benefits that come with that experience. It's just that, to your point and mine earlier, it's reactionary, and the second another state comes out with another law, they will be forced to address that. I know they're trying to lobby and communicate on a national level, but we'll see. How long does it take before it gets to that place? Yeah, these studios, to my point, the USC example, there's many others. There's a number of schools they're getting in front of this, Texas and Nebraska and others. That's just a very small first step. Realistically speaking, would it influence, as we talked about your experience and my experience in college, and feeling financially strapped, how much money would it take for you to switch from probably the school you see as the best experience for you to another one? You can see this in scholarships. Private schools do a great job of, allocating and attracting people with scholarships, but it's true at the state school level too. How much is the financial, sort of impact of you going to a school or another? No more than the value of that talent, for sure, when we're talking about football and basketball. So I personally assume that it won't take long for it to be in that place, in which is not even contemplated today. And I'm sure I'd be in trouble with many of our friends and clients by saying this even today. But in short order, it would go from a place where a coach in the university wants hands off, stay away from it. We would never do that, to we are fully and completely embracing this, and we are walking you into these places where our alumni, lead these businesses. And here's the portfolio of companies and brands that will almost certainly financially support you, if you come to this university. How long did it take the NFL to change its stance on gambling from something we would never touch to something that's an official partnership, right?
Exactly. I think we all have whiplash from that change.
Yeah, these things are measured in months. The NCAA and collegiate athletics as a whole is always more conservative and moves slower than the pro sports world. But not very long before I would consider that to be a massive incentive and a piece of attracting student athletes to play at your university. For better or worse.
Mm-hmm. So we'll shift gears to the other side of the conversation and to the brands. If I'm a smaller brand, a restaurant in my hometown of Springfield, Ohio, knows that I'm a content machine that I'm very well liked around town, but I also have a nice profile nationally in my small sport. What, from that perspective, but just brands in general, how attractive is the potential to scoop up I'm trying to find the right word for it, but maybe some more affordable content and talent compared to what they might be paying going through a traditional sponsorship and licensing deal at the pro ranks. How does that stack up in your mind on the brand side?
Well, speaking in all relatives, it's actually not super attractive, although it should be. So if you were to compare TV, and just to visually do this, the way CPMs have almost tripled in the last decade, and yet the fragmentation of audience, right, the shrinking audience in many cases, we've gone, from whatever, we're up to about 200 channels as an example, and yet the price on a per touch basis is here. Social media is still down here. So social, digital, mobile is still a really good buy on a per person basis as an advertiser. And then when you consider effectiveness, by many measures, it's actually more effective than television, certainly more measurable, certainly more easily focused, laser focused targeting. So very little waste. So when you consider all those things, there's no question of what the future holds, right? These things like endorsements and sponsorships and digital and, direct communication, right? The difficulty is going out and striking one-off endorsement deals, going and dealing with the talent and dealing with the creative process with these different folks. Whereas, these sort of traditional measured media, you can place it, set it, forget it. You don't have to deal with it. And, you have certain expected outcomes, even if they're less efficient or effective. Agencies are plagued by this, because it's a lot more work than doing a media buy. Brands are, it's more difficult to contemplate, takes a greater level of expertise. You have to activate against it. You have to put working dollars against it. So for a bunch of reasons, these reasons and many others explain why it's lagging what you would expect a rational buyer to do. But I don't think they're champing at the bit here. I don't think that the brands are just dying and all of a sudden collegiate athletes are available and they're just going to rush out with spending. Again, look at major brands. I mean, we work with some of the biggest and best, Red Bull, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, Toyota, Visa, Oracle, T-Mobile. I'm just trying to bias my list of clients again toward ones that do endorsement deals or have how many athletes are in their portfolio, right?
Right.
I mean, someone like a Visa that has a great number of athletes, it's a very small number of super elite, well-known Olympic athletes. There aren't brands out there other than endemic categories like apparel and equipment that go out and sign any more than 10 or 15 endorsements. Most brands sign, 3 to 0.
Right.
So, sorry for the long explanation, but for those contemplating where you go with your career or dollars or how you monetize this or what you're going to do professionally to be in front of this, I just don't picture a massive wave of brands. That's why those, they're called multi-channel networks. The Maker Studios or the Full Screen example I gave earlier, these market makers that put influencers and could in theory put athletes together with brands. They take a very large percent of those deals and they exist because it is so difficult to find that talent and sort through it and strike those individual deals that they aggregate them and they can place ads through people who, are reaching the audience that you want to reach. So that intermediary place, that multi-channel network, as it's called, sort of business model exists because of these inefficiencies. So in that realm, I could see some dollars flowing quickly. There's going to be some players, I think you can quickly name them, who are in sort of that space already in the endorsement space. So there's a few of those players that will be benefactors and win in creating a marketplace for these very small deals. But no, the brand side, rushing out there to sign individual large deals, it's pretty unrealistic.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I think everybody, it seems like there's been a lot of dreaming and salivating about the possibility to get that. But, that always, it kind of goes back to a thought that I'm still, social media is very effective, but it still just seems, having done very few of social media endorsements myself on behalf of clients, knowing how complicated that was to corral the athlete, make sure things were activated properly, how to track it, and then how to present what happened back to the client for during recap season. It goes back to still, I think the industry is trying to figure out the best way to quantify what social media is within a sponsorship and a marketing program. And now throwing this in there, I think it's just adding another bit of homework onto the plates of folks like you have working there, Navigate, and sponsorship sellers in general. So it's an interesting, hearing your explanation of it, it's an interesting thought going back to when I first approached this topic, what the possibility is in terms of big dollars, but also what the net benefit is. Because again, even if we look at the marketplace now with staffs being stretched thin, this might not even be that attractive of an opportunity until the world settles down a little bit and we're able to get people back in the stands, full campuses again, full stadiums. So it's a very interesting discussion now, having your perspective. Um,
Oh, it's just
so,
my opinion, right?
yeah.
There's no doubt. Today, you're sitting in an athletic department, and there's furloughs and layoffs and massive budget shortfall, and this is just another pain. Like, oh, you'd have to administer this. You got to be responsible if something goes wrong, but there's not a lot of financial upside, and you can't be the intermediary, so you actually have no role in that. This is just a headache right now, but like most things, right? Right after it's painful and it's a headache, it becomes a giant opportunity. And so, yeah, I do think schools will, it'll be really tough for schools to put in the effort to be in front of this, but the ones that will, well, they'll have a jump on everybody, right? In recruiting and the full collegiate athletic experience, right? On behalf of their athletes.
Exactly. And it could even turn into a sponsorship opportunity for the athletic department a couple years down the road after athlete X leaves campus, but that company enjoyed the access that they had just through that athlete. So it could turn into an opportunity worth the headache and the effort that the school had to go through to make sure that they were staying within the lines of that deal and that athlete.
Sure. And even in the scenarios, the exotic scenarios that I'm predicting that it'll move toward eventually, the school is not writing that check. So the
Mm-hmm.
school is not paying those athletes. So you have the chance to see these needy, possibly deserving student athletes find all this additional compensation, and you're not writing the check. That's it's not too bad.
Right. Exactly. Well, that ties up the main topic of discussion, but I do want to throw it over to you to three questions that I like to ask all of my guests just to get to know you a little bit better. So, question one, AJ, what are you reading right now?
Thank you for asking. I love to read. I actually am an Audible person these days, but there's all this beautiful hiking out here in Arizona, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm about a book a week person, so I'll give you the last month a bunch of behavioral economic stuff, and that's core to what Navigate does, right? If you
Mhm.
just relying on pure data, you're going to miss something. If you're relying on pure psychology, you're going to miss something. The combination of those two is really powerful. So I'm just finishing Predictably Irrational. It's a good book on that very subject. Very similar as Nudge, probably the first widely popular book on behavioral economics. That one's Richard Thaler. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it if you're in the world of marketing, and without question. And then Talking to Strangers, which was really an easy read. It's really fun because it's very story based. You know, that's Malcolm Gladwell. He's good at doing that. So nice, easy read. I'd call that the starter book in this realm of what we don't understand about human decision making. And then I did the Hoffman process, if you're familiar with that. It's sort of a exploring patterns we adopt from our parents type
Mm.
psych experience for about a week in Northern California. And a book that was recommended to me coming out of that was called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. So that's the outlier book there, the self-compassion one. We could all
Oh,
do it a little more. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good for you. A book a week. I try to jump between two books at a time, and I've certainly read more this year than I've probably read at any point in my life since March when things started shutting down. But you've got me beat with one a week.
Well, I hike a lot, so a lot of audible time, you know, I
Okay.
listen while I'm working out, stuff like that. So I'm cheating.
It's efficiency. It's efficiency.
Efficiency. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so, question two: who are you following in or out of the sports industry right now?
Who, um, I read a lot on anthropology, biology, and behavioral economics. So some of those characters and players are super interesting to me. Um, if I'm not listening to a book, I listen to podcasts for the guests. I don't follow necessarily a host. I follow the guests.
Hmm.
It, it's weird to say this because I know fiction is fun and we all deserve, a release and entertainment in this world, but real life things are stranger than fiction quite often, right? And there's enough incredible stories and people to learn from out there that I don't know if I'm ever going to wander off of those subjects. Endless entertainment in that world. Yeah, that would be it for me. it helps me professionally, but it helps me personally grow as a person, right? To be a better listener, to learn more, to understand better. So a lot of positive psychology stuff, along with all that behavioral economic stuff.
Okay, excellent. And final question, what are you going to be keeping your eye on over the next 3 months?
Uh, it's hard to say anything other than COVID-19 and the vaccine rollout and what have you. Obviously, my bias is toward how that impacts attendance in person and sport,
Mm-hmm.
media, and other forms of entertainment consumption. Um, Something I think that I'm personally paying attention to, is the mental health and wellness. It's been a stressful year for a lot of reasons for a lot of people, and we're very privileged here in this country. There's a lot of suffering all around the world. I'm far less time and attention is spent on that, and it's pretty interesting to me. It'll be interesting to see where we're at in a year. If we're back to normal or a new normal or whatever it might be. But I know it's been stressful for me, and I have no legitimate good reasons to be stressed, but I find myself that way a lot. So yeah, I'd say combine mental health and wellness with the impact of whatever is this next phase of COVID. How about yourself?
I mean, a lot of it's going to be the vaccine and what that does to getting people back in venues. I'm a big live music fan. I've been following the band Fish since they came back from their hiatus in 2009, and this will be the first year since then that I haven't seen them. So me and all of my friends were chomping at the bit to get back out to whatever venue we can. So a lot on what the live entertainment industry is going to do moving forward. Live or Ticketmaster said that they'll probably require people to have proof of vaccination before they start letting people back to concerts. Um, Live entertainment was included in the newest bill that I think just got signed off on last night or today in Washington, thankfully. So, really, how that industry rebounds, because I know locally in Boston, we've lost a ton of historic small music venues that have seen some great entertainers come through in their history, and they just aren't going to come back. You know, as big as Boston is, sadly, those will probably get torn down and turned into parking lots. So really the focus will be on getting that industry back up and running, because that's it's hit a lot more people than a lot of people can realize. So that'd be it for me.
If I can give you a teaser, we've been doing some tracking research on people's willingness to attend events again, live
Mhm.
events, with or without a vaccine. And people tend to be overly optimistic in self-reporting these kind of behaviors. So I wouldn't trust the numbers 100%, but the trend you can trust. And the trend has been steadily rising. It's over 80% of people who are fans willing to go back pre-vaccine. Now that doesn't mean the same frequency and duration and things like that, but there's some really good signs that people come back. And the venues we work with, the properties we work with are planning on it. Some people have some very packed schedules in August and onward, trying to pack in essentially tours that were canceled, almost
Mhm.
catching up for lost time. I wouldn't have thought that intuitively is how it'd work. I thought we'd have slow played our way back into it, but it makes you feel any better. I don't know about Fish specifically, but the music business and the live entertainment business, they are preparing to just come back and storm, even making up for lost time. So knock on wood. I hope that's true, because that'll be a benefit to all of us.
Yeah, trust me, I need it. My friends need it. I think everybody needs it. I held on to my tickets instead of getting a refund from last summer's tour, so we're ready whenever they come back. Um, but that is it. Thank you so much. I think the moral of the story for today is there's still a lot that we don't know about the NIL discussion, but it's going to be interesting as the NCAA settles on their third-party administrator, and then we start to see companies dip their toe in the water and take the temperature of what the market's going to bear for it. I think it's a tremendously fascinating time in the NCAA for what we're about to see on the legislative side and for the athletes. So thank you for coming on, AJ.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Pleasure to see you. Glad everything's going great. Let me know if you ever get to Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm your host, all right? See you, man.
Fantastic. Thank you.